as a hockey player now. So let's look at it. You got your 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid that's possibly moving on. So now decisions are a little bit more important. So like one that I had a conversation with my son about was, okay, so pretty sure he's going to get drafted, at probably fairly high. And when he gets drafted, there's going to be decisions to make. So, maybe I'll make it general. So as a 16-year-old kid, you have a decision to make, 16, 17 years old. So if you get drafted fairly high to a team, it's a nice option because there's a higher chance that you can make that team. But you know what else it gives you? It gives you another option. If you're drafted that high, then you probably will have a lot of schools that would be willing to pay for your school to go there too. So what most people are going to do is they're going to look at, I could have this right now. That's my son's doing that. I'm doing that because, and this suits his lifestyle more, actually. But most people are going to look, okay, I can have that. I'm going to take that. But is it the best thing for you? Are you going to be like, so you have to look at the player now. So playing in the OHL might be the end all be all, but if you're not physically developed and not ready, then it's not for you. So anyways, you get drafted. Okay, so now you have a decision. Do you want to go? Okay, if you want to play in the NHL, that's probably a good idea. But if you want to go to college, you have another option. So now you have two options instead of one. So if you go to college, you've got another 4 years that you can develop to become a much better hockey player, physically stronger, maybe mentally stronger. Yeah, so there's a decision. If you go to if you go to the Canadian Hockey League or the OHL, there's a decision. Okay, you have a couple years to get on that team. Now, let's just say you're a really good player. Is it the best thing to go to the OHL when you're 16? It might be, but there's other options. So I told my son, like, if a team actually, he's a late birthday too, but if a team actually, when they draft him, they say, yeah, we want to sign you and you'll play here. Well, I already know what that means. That means that, yes, they're going to sign you. You're going to play most likely very little. So is that a good decision? Is that going to help his development? Well, we have to look at the organization. Is the organization a good organization that develops kids? Well, maybe if he doesn't have as much game time, are they giving him the weight room? Are they giving him the structure to develop him as a player? Is he getting good touches in practice? So if it is, okay, maybe that's a good thing. But if it's not, that might be a really bad situation. What if he goes to a good team that has a really deep team and he's, I told him, I said, if they say, hey, well, we want you to play for our junior B team for a year, that's not bad.
Right.
The ego can get in the way. And if the ego gets in the way, you'll never want that. But that might be the best thing long term to take that junior B or to go to take a year to season, I guess, or marinate and become better and have confidence and never lose your step. And you're still playing against bigger, older guys. So at 17, now he'll be 17 the following year. He's as good or better hockey player than he was, and probably more ready to play at that next level. That's a good decision. Yep. So that, because we got to remember that the long term, if we're looking at the long term, well, this year could make a difference long term.
Right.
So yes, you could, and so I was that guy. So I was drafted, signed right away. Right, and on a deep team my first year, so no one told me how anything works. So I signed, and there was games where you hardly ever touch the ice. My confidence, not that someone could take your confidence away, but I didn't know how to internalize it. So now it's like, oh my God, what's going on? So really, what would have been better, and as good of a hockey player I was, what would have actually been better if I did this with the right attitude and said long term I want to be there, was put the ego aside. And say, okay, I'm going to go down to the level before the OHL, and I'm going to dominate, and I'm going to be score my goals and just hone little parts of my game so that when I go into the next level of hockey, I'm ready.
Right.
Most 16-year-olds aren't ready.
Yeah, and that's a huge point, right? Because there's so many, like we did that podcast a few episodes back about the OHL draft, right? And on that list, what did we have? 5-10 guys that had a legit, like somewhat of a career from the 2013 OHL draft, right?
Yeah.
And so that means that all those other guys that were first round, second round, third round picks, and that we haven't even got to the later guys yet.
Yeah.
But just in the first 3 rounds, maybe it wasn't the best idea that they went and played right away, right? Maybe they could have done something else different. Maybe, like you said, like there's a guy that I'm thinking of that, again, like a while back now, he went to Owen Sound super early in the draft and had the worst time. Had a terrible experience. And I think he was early second round pick, right? And nothing came of it. Now, maybe he would have been better off. And then I'm not saying like you say, no, I'm not coming or what. That's not the advice I'm necessarily giving. I'm just saying maybe he would have been better off playing a year in junior B where it's a big enough jump as it is just to that, right? So you jump in and it's not as competitive. It's not as, you're not playing with the top guys. So you still have that jump in the physical maturity and the speed and how the game is played. You still have that jump to deal with, not to the same degree, but you're still dealing with that. And maybe it's a little bit less so you can handle it a little bit better. And now you can step onto that team and be someone who has a greater impact and needs to play a more serious role on that team. So now you're going to get the benefit of all the practicing, playing with older guys in the more physically mature environment, and you get to play, actually. And you might still get to play in the role that you want to play in. You might still get to be an offensive player when that's the type of player you are, rather than playing fourth line minutes with two guys that don't know how to make plays because one guy's a fighter and the other guy whatever, and they're in and out of the lineup and your line is different every time you play, and these kind of situations that can come up,
it's an ego thing, man. The ego will get in the way. I'm looking at it with my kid. Like I tell people all the time, I can speak as a player, as a coach, as a trainer, as a dad. Is there anything else? Like, is there something else? No, that's what I am. I can cover every aspect. And the ego can actually get in the way. Like, it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's my ego. I guess I'm so happy for my kid to like
well, I think there's probably some of your ego too.
Well, there's got to be a little bit, but like I'm careful because I just see how hard he works and how good he can be. And I want it to, I guess I want it to work out for my son the best
of course
it can for him.
Of course.
But it's not like, it's not going to change my life if he goes and plays in the OHL and the NHL. It's honestly.
Well, let me just hop in because where the ego comes in is that you're thinking local to him, right? That's where like the little ego piece comes in because you're just thinking about Charlie, what's best for Charlie, how good Charlie can be, the how good he is when he's 100% on. Like these are the things that are circling your head, right? But when you step back from that, none of that really matters, right? Because to the team that's taken him, he's coming in and he's not going to be the top guy. It doesn't matter, that's right? So if he can't jump in and be the fourth line role player they need during the games, and then in practice he can develop himself how he needs to. But if he can't jump in and be that, or he can't jump in and kill penalties on the third line, which is something they need, or he's not fast enough to be a penalty killer, which is something that they need. If he can't do those things, then all of those other things that you care about and that you see don't matter. And that's what happens. And that's what happens with those teams. And that's probably the little piece of ego that comes in because you're like, okay, he's this good. I know he's this good. But from that team's perspective, it's like, okay, but not yet though. Right? And that's where it's hard to separate. And then especially when you're the kid too, that's when it's really tough because nobody wants to be the guy that gets drafted and then gets sent back to junior B.
No, that's exactly.
And
that's an ego.
Even though you're probably way better than all your buddies in the area because you got drafted and actually maybe you got signed still and they just sent you back to play. It's hard to be the guy that comes back from the OHL team because it's just like a smack in the face, like you weren't good enough to stick in the OHL, right? Even though that's actually probably the best thing for you.
Yes.
Right? So
it's the shake.
It's the shake. Yeah.
It's the shake, man. It's short term. I could play for the London Knights.
And that's where there it comes again, right?
Not develop, but I could get on a good program and lose the weight properly.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're talking about, that short term thing, right? And if your goal is past junior hockey, which it is for everyone, or they say it is, then you're trying to think about what's in your best interest over that time period, right? You're looking at, okay, what's the trajectory till I'm 25 or 23? Like that's the trajectory you're looking at, right? And then you can map along the way, and it's like, okay, one of my, like, even here's a good example. It's like one of my short-term goals is I want to play on the World Junior team.
Yes.
Okay. There's a good short-term goal.
That's awesome.
Okay. But your long-term goal is I want to be an NHL player and have a career.
Yeah.
Okay. So what if those two goals don't line up?
Right.
Because if you want to play on the World Junior team, you need to be a stud in the OHL when you're 18, 19.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and if you're not, you're not playing on the World Junior team.
No, you have no chance.
So what if it's more beneficial for you to take a year in junior B, come up, get your first couple licks in the OHL. By the time you're 18, you're just starting to get top minutes in the OHL. You're not getting picked for the World Junior team.
That's right.
But that might be better for you to get to the NHL, right?
Yep.
So that's just a good way. You think about, you have these local goals, right? But then on the in the greater scheme, you need to keep in mind what's best for that ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have to take some hits along the way.
Yeah.
Like you're going to have a piece of humble pie multiple times.
And that goes back
right?
to always saying like don't get too hung up on how great you are today.
Exactly.
You know, as a 13-year-old superstar, I've seen these guys a million times. Again, not a million, but they fade away. Because a lot of the times, sometimes guys are good, but they don't work on what they need to work on. Yeah. So you can get by being bigger. And it happens in the OHL too. Happens in the NHL sometimes. Oh, yeah. Guys are just physically ready, and then they fizzle out because they're not actually physically ready.
Well, think of even the World Junior team.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. Like how many of those guys? They're the studs. Yeah. But then after that, they're gone. Like they disappear. Mm-hmm. Right. You think of the guys that were. I remember. Who's the one guy? Is it Della Rivera?
Yeah. Played with Dalton.
I loved watching that guy because he's such a pest playing against tough, big hits, whatever. He was on the World Junior team.
Yeah. And had a good tournament.
And did not even a sniff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's I'm looking at a lot of the kids that are Charlie's age, and we talked about it. Like there's going to be a lot of people that are very, very disappointed. It happens every year. I'm not saying anything in particular, and some guys are going to get drafted. You're going to go, why do you get drafted and stuff? And they look on potential. But it just isn't over. There's a different path for it. Mm-hmm. It might be longer. Yeah, but it's okay,